Chapter 10, let's talk about torts. What a kind of a funky name for something, torts, huh? But let's go ahead and discuss those. Keep it simple. There are 3 different types of torts, but I do get ahead of myself a little bit. So let's wait and we'll talk about that as we move along. So what is a tort? It's a civil wrong, civil, right? Not criminal, so civil, between people, okay? Not public. The public can be involved in some torts. Forgive me, they can. When some of those actions might be brought by a government agency suing a person, for example, or vice versa, right? Say a city government not meeting its responsibility or being negligent. So torts can involve public officials as well, but generally it's between people, right? So it's a civil wrong other than a breach of contract, and it limits how people act and use their resources. What it really does is it requires that we all have a duty of care. We all have to act in ways that don't cause harm to other people, generally speaking. So let's move on. So tortious behavior results in a tort, wrongdoing, right? A tortfeasor. I'll put that on a test just because it's such a weird name. I've tried to look that up though, and it doesn't show up any place other than our book. So maybe there's new. It's been a while, a couple of years probably since I looked, but and maybe now there's an official definition or something. That's a wrong. Look at that's cases of beer on the road. That person needs to, it's obviously a criminal offense, but it should be a tort as well. We should be able to sue them. Think of the anguish that beer went through, getting busted on the asphalt instead of drunk like a beer ought to be. So 3 types. Remember I said there's 3 types of tort. There's intentional, there's negligent, and there are strict liability torts. And we'll talk about each of those. Let's just start here with types of tort cases first. And this doesn't break it down. This isn't by category. Okay, so we're kind of getting a little bit out of sync here, but in any event, as you might expect, the most common type of a tort case is an auto accident. It happens all the time, right? People bump into each other, you hit somebody backing out of your parking spot, whatever the case may be. Okay, dangerous property, that could be businesses that are selling it. It could be that you have, maybe you're poisoning the stream that's above your neighbor, right? Because you're using too many chemicals on your lawn or something. Whatever the case may be, okay, those types of things could be dangerous property, product liability, making a poor product, and medical malpractice gets into the news quite a bit. But look at that; it's probably 5% maybe of the cases. It seems like they're big awards, and also they're goofy things like doctors operating on the wrong leg or something. So what happens to torts? Most of them just get settled. If you went back and you said most of them are automobiles, 60% of them, okay, it makes sense. Somebody whacks your car, pretty good chance they have insurance. They're supposed to, right? And the insurance company settles, and away you go. Okay, not to say that you don't do some whining and moaning a little bit, try to bump up what you get from the insurance company. Certainly you do, but still, most of those end in some kind of an agreed upon settlement, dismissed by judges, right? Jury verdict, look how low that is, or a bench trial. Those are low. What maybe 3%. Okay. So an intentional tort's a deliberate action that causes some injury. Injury doesn't have to be physical injury to your body. It can be, emotional. It can be injury to your property. Any number of things, right? But there has to be a desire to bring about certain results, or knowing and doing it anyways, knowing that the results are substantially likely. If you do something and you know that there's a really good chance that it's going to cause harm, and you go ahead and do it anyways, that could be considered an intentional tort. Some examples, of course: assault and battery, infliction of mental distress, be it in business dealings, maybe, be it in personal relationships, those types of things. Invasion of privacy, and again, that can be cyber types of things now. False imprisonment, malicious prosecution. You might see that stores that detain somebody suspected of shoplifting who in fact didn't shoplift. Trespass. Conversion is the using of another's resources for your own good. Tom Price, who was the Health and Human Services Secretary, right? It turns out he was using government private jet or something, right, when he probably should have been flying commercial. That's sort of kind of an example of conversion. It could be if my mom's getting older and my brother and I are taking more and more care of her financials. Well, what if we said, yeah, mom ought to just buy us a trip to Hawaii next year? Mom might actually go along with that, but if we did it on our own, a judge might look at that, or a jury might look at that and say, we were using her funds inappropriately, the funds that should have been for her care, right? Defamation, that's saying bad things about other people or writing, but defamation is the broad term. Slander and libel are the more specific terms, slander being the spoken form and libel being the written form. Okay, but defamation is the broader form that says we're saying something about somebody that damages them and causes harm. So let's say XYZ restaurant downtown, and I start going around town and saying, geez, I ate there and I got food poisoning even though I had not. Okay. And all of a sudden, people quit going to XYZ restaurant, or maybe I write a letter to the editor or something so it's widely spread, widely disseminated. Okay, that could be defamation if it's not true, right? If it's true, that's another thing altogether. If it's true, I can say it. Okay, but if it's not true, I shouldn't say it because that's going to cause harm to that business. Fraud, corporate governance, there's lots of cases about that. In the common law of business torts, we'll kind of talk about that. It's not necessarily that much different than defamation, but between businesses, say. Oh, there it is, right there. Injurious falsehood or trade disparagement, right, is common law business torts. So if I'm, I gave you an example of an individual maybe writing a letter to the editor, but what if it's one business, saying things, maybe, gosh, I wouldn't do business with that guy over there. He's a crook, and he's not a crook. And you're just saying that because you want to get the person's business that you're talking to. That could be an injurious falsehood, right? Depending on how far you take it. Again, if you're telling some truthful things, that can be okay. But if you're getting out there and saying some things that maybe aren't true or they're on the edge of truth, better be careful. Intentional interference with contractual relations, trying to undercut somebody that's already got a contract in place, trying to do some things like that might be a cause of this intentional interference. Okay. Cyber torts. Defamation, of course, sitting at home and you're blogging about a business, you're blogging about a restaurant, you're doing those types of things, okay? Again, if you're expressing a truth, if I go home and I say, gosh, I was at dinner at XYZ restaurant last night and man, the service was really slow and the food when we finally got it was not of adequate quality, okay? That's my opinion, and if it's close to being truthful, okay, then that's probably okay. If I go and I absolutely lie about what happened, that's not okay. That might be defamation. That would be defamation then. That would be, if I was typing a blog, that would be the libel or the written form. Intentional infliction of mental distress, and there have been some high-profile cases. We've seen some in the news or on Facebook and whatnot. There was one just in the last year where a person talked her boyfriend into committing suicide. Okay, that person may well have been arrested and charged with a crime, but also the boy's parents then could certainly sue that person for their intentional infliction of mental distress, right? Okay. Hackers, misappropriation of trade secrets. Okay. Obviously, those things are crimes. Hackers, we've seen Equifax just recently, but misappropriation of trade secrets, stealing that kind of information and using it, etc., doing that online. And then online fraud, and that could be wide-ranging. There was an example, and this was years ago when the Internet was maybe a little newer than it is today, but some guys set themselves out to be like investment advisors giving free advice, kind of like the Motley Fools. And what they did is they purchased some stock in a really low-priced stock, okay, penny stock we'll call it, and then they went online in their blogs and they started talking up this company and saying how wonderful it was, how good it was, and why everybody ought to invest in it, and a lot of people did. And because it started out at such a low level, its stock price went up, and the gains as a percentage basis were just huge for these guys, and they sold out. Well, it turns out that their analysis, if you want to call it that, was fraudulent. It was bogus, and people lost a lot of money as a result of that. And what they committed there was a fraud. Lots of other examples of fraud. So, negligence. We'll catch that in part 2.